7 seconds before Vex Callahan put a bullet through the skull of the seventh Speaker of the Galactic Council, he sneezed, violently, into a silk curtain made from the wings of an endangered Valerian moth. The diplomatic assembly froze. Not because of the sneeze, but because the man who sneezed had just strolled into the most secure chamber in the universe wearing combat boots, chewing what looked suspiciously like bubble gum, and holding a sniper rifle wrapped in duct tape and pizza receipts. And then, before anyone could speak, scream, or stand, he said, "Bless me!" and fired. Blood sprayed like confetti across the crystal walls of the chamber, splattering onto representatives from 12 galaxies, who sat in absolute stunned silence. The seventh Speaker, a glimmering, telepathic being made of light and laws, collapsed into a pile of bioluminescent ash. No warning. No message. No request for negotiation. Just one sniper, one bullet, and an entire galaxy suddenly scrambling to figure out how a species they just agreed to eliminate had struck first. The day had begun with ceremony. An ornate hall lit by living stars, a chorus of interstellar monks humming in 16 frequencies, and a unanimous vote: Earth, now deemed a Class 9 contagion species, was to be erased. Quietly, of course. No death rays or fireworks. Just an atmospheric scrubbing, subtle and deniable. Nobody would notice Earth's absence. It would be a footnote in the database of galactic hygiene. The vote passed without a hitch. Even the four-eyed fungus ambassador nodded solemnly. That was supposed to be the end of it. Until Vex showed up. He didn't announce his arrival. No clearance codes. No escort. He simply walked off a stolen diplomatic shuttle, argued with the AI for 5 minutes about which side was front, then kicked in the doors like it was a bar fight in a space western. Guards raised their weapons. They hesitated. He didn't. And now, with one of the Council's highest leaders dead, the silence order was the least of anyone's concerns. In the control tower orbiting the chamber, alarms screeched. Emergency force fields locked the room. Vex was gone. Vanished in the confusion. Somewhere deep in the spires of the capital planet's underbelly, Earth's sniper was already planning his next shot. And none of them knew why. 3 hours earlier, on the edge of the solar system, Earth's last secure war room had been lit in red. General Harmon, a woman who hadn't smiled since the Battle of Mercury, slammed her fist on the table. They voted. It's done. They're going to wipe us. No appeal. No notice. Just vanish us. Around her, exhausted diplomats and military strategists spoke in half-broken murmurs, defeated. Earth had poked one too many cosmic bears. The memes, the hacking of a planetary census drone for April Fools, the incident with the space whale, too many offenses. Too much arrogance. Too much Earth. Then someone mentioned a name. A terrible idea. A last-ditch, desperate name. Vex Callahan. Half the room laughed. The other half looked horrified. Didn't he try to assassinate the moon once? Someone whispered. He did assassinate the moon. It just didn't stick, said Harmon. They didn't summon him. There was no time. No one even contacted him. Vex just showed up at the launch pad, shoved the ambassador into a supply closet, and hijacked the mission. He told the pilot he was going to shoot silence in the face, and then left Earth in a vessel designed for polite apologies. Back in the capital, chaos had already taken root. The death of the seventh Speaker wasn't just symbolic, it was strategic. That Speaker had been the champion of the silence protocol. With them gone, arguments erupted. Finger-pointing began. Half the Council believed the assassination was Earth's declaration of war. The other half believed something worse. Earth had known about the silence vote before it happened. Which should have been impossible. What no one realized, not yet, was that Vex didn't come for diplomacy. He didn't even come for revenge. He came for something deeper. A truth buried inside the Council's pristine archives. Something that had been hidden from humanity, and from the Council itself. Vex's next stop wasn't a target. It was a library. The sniper crawled through maintenance ducts, conversing with his rifle's AI, which sounded permanently exasperated. "You could have at least issued a warning," it muttered. "I did. I sneeze," Vex replied, sliding down into a gravity shaft. "That's considered polite where I'm from." The AI sighed. "They'll hunt you now. All of them. There are 10,000 credits on your head already and the body's still warm. I'm worth more than that." "Insulting. You're insane." "No, I'm Earth. There's a difference." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, bounty hunters stirred. Military ships rerouted. Galnet news feeds ran 24/7 headlines. "Human sniper kills council speaker. War imminent." Panic blossomed like mold in a forgotten fridge. Everyone wanted answers. Some wanted Vex dead. Others wanted to hire him. The council convened again under emergency protocol. The remaining speakers demanded Earth explain itself. Earth, for its part, sent a single communique. Oops. Inside a forgotten sublevel of the council archives, Vex found what he came for. A file. Sealed. Ancient. Redacted in 17 languages. He shot the lock open and read the first line aloud. "Silence protocol activated to conceal. Holy sh*T." He grinned. The council hadn't voted Earth silent because it was dangerous. They'd voted Earth silent because Earth had stumbled onto something. Something buried. Something forbidden. Something the council itself was afraid of. Then the lights went red again. Security bots dropped from the ceiling. Sirens howled. The AI in his rifle asked quietly, "Do you have a plan?" "Yeah," Vex said, flipping the file into his jacket and aiming upward. "Don't get caught." And just like that, he started running again. Not from death, but toward it, dragging the secrets of an entire galaxy behind him, with a sniper rifle that wouldn't shut up and a world that had nothing left to lose. The problem with legends is that they don't retire well. Vex Callahan had once been a name whispered in the kinds of places where governments did their dirtiest work, the man you called when plausible deniability needed a trigger finger. The kind of man who didn't just go off the rails, but brought his own explosives to make sure the train never came back. Now, years later, bloated with boredom and soaked in a near-lethal cocktail of cheap alcohol and conspiracy theories, he had somehow become Earth's last option. Except he wasn't. He wasn't even on the shortlist. Vex simply heard what was happening, cursed loudly at his toaster, and hijacked the diplomatic shuttle before Earth had the chance to stop him. The mission wasn't his. Not officially. The actual envoy, a career diplomat named Lila Harmon, was still tied to a chair in a janitor's closet back on Earth, listening to Vex's voice loop through the intercom giving her breakfast orders. Vex hadn't meant to get involved. Truly. He was done. Retired. Living in a swamp house on the rusted edge of Mars. Then someone tried to blow it up. Twice. That's when he figured something was going on, and if Earth was going down, he might as well go out swinging. The truth was, Vex wasn't just a sniper. He was a psychologist's worst nightmare wrapped in sarcasm and old war medals. He had a theory for everything. A suspicion. A paranoia laced with enough evidence to sound plausible, and just enough insanity to make people back away slowly. His rifle, an outdated long-range plasma cannon nicknamed Mercy, had been customized beyond all recognition. It talked. It argued. It refused to fire when it was ethically compromised, which, as it turned out, was almost always. Vex and Mercy had a deeply dysfunctional relationship that somehow worked, like a married couple who hadn't filed the paperwork because they were too busy surviving explosions. On the second day after the council incident, Vex emerged on the moon of Tysar III, wearing a stolen ambassador's robe and carrying a hover crate filled with cheese. He dropped the crate in the middle of a crowded marketplace, climbed on top of it, and began shouting into a megaphone. "Citizens of the galaxy! I am the uninvited consequence of your poor decisions." The crowd stared, uncertain if this was performance art or terrorism. "You wanted to silence Earth. But Earth does not go quietly. We send our regards in the form of me. Sorry in advance." By the time local security arrived, Vex was already gone, leaving behind a dozen leaflets explaining the flaws in the Council's silence protocol, and a hand-drawn comic featuring himself punching a space senator in the face. That wasn't part of the plan. He didn't have a plan. But what he did have was momentum and just enough suicidal charisma to keep the galaxy watching. The Council, now fractured in private, was losing grip of the narrative. Half its members demanded retribution. The others were spooked, unsure how a single human had outmaneuvered every defense system and infiltrated their most sacred chamber. Some whispered about a deeper strategy. Some believed Earth had allied with another power. Others thought Vex was a symptom of something far worse. The galaxy wasn't as secure as they had believed. Meanwhile, bounty hunters started lining up. A price had been placed on Vex's head, and where money flowed, so did desperation. The first attempt came from a Koran assassin with 6 arms and a cloaking device that reeked of fish. Vex shot him through a ventilation shaft while eating a sandwich. The second came from a pair of sentient spores disguised as a smoothie. Mercy refused to fire, citing health regulations. Vex drank it anyway, and spent the next 24 hours hallucinating vividly and arguing with a tree he believed was his father. The third bounty hunter never made it past the planning stage. Somehow, their entire ship exploded on launch. Vex claimed no involvement, though he was seen 2 hours prior asking if anyone had some spare antimatter lying around. Somewhere along the way, the rifle began to question their mission. "We're not saving Earth," it muttered as Vex rappelled down the glass towers of Mirabel Station. "We're making it worse," Vex replied while chewing on gum that had long given up its flavor. "That's the thing about chaos. Sometimes you need a bigger mess to uncover the lies under the carpet. You're not a philosopher. You're a drunk with a trigger finger. Same thing, just different colleges." But beneath the banter, something real was forming. Vex had found files. Fragments. A trail. The silence protocol wasn't just about Earth. There were others, species and systems quietly erased, their histories wiped clean. No war. No trial. Just a single vote and a disappearance. And each time, the same counselor had led the motion. The same data system had handled the vote. And each time, something just didn't line up. Back on Earth, panic had set in. With communications limited, governments feared retaliation. The United Earth Coalition issued a statement denouncing Vex Callahan and referring to him as a rogue operative acting without authorization. Secretly, they rooted for him. Publicly, they scrambled ships. The Council's wrath, should it come, would be biblical. But Vex didn't care. He'd been thrown away by the system years ago. He was the wrong man, at the wrong time, doing the right thing in the worst way possible. That made him dangerous. Unpredictable. The perfect glitch in a machine too arrogant to believe it could be hacked. On the 5th day, Vex broke into a Council comm tower and hijacked a Galactic broadcast. His face, pixelated and bruised, appeared on screens from the inner rings to the abandoned mining moons. He smiled like a man who knew he was seconds from death and didn't give a damn. "To everyone listening," he said, "I've got questions. Like why Earth was targeted the same year a vote-counting algorithm was quietly rewritten. Or why the same AI system now marks 78 planets as uninhabitable despite archival proof they had thriving civilizations. I'm not saying your council's lying to you. I'm just saying they're deleting the people who ask too many questions." The feed cut out. He vanished again. The galaxy stirred. And deep within the shadows of Council space, someone who had not moved in decades stood up. Not to hunt Vex, but to stop what he had just started. The Galactic Council was not used to doubt. For millennia, it had been a machine of clean resolutions, sealed corridors, and unbreakable consensus. When they passed a decree, it was followed. When they erased a world, there were no ripples. Just silence, like it had never existed. But now, the seams were starting to tear. And the thing pulling at those seams wasn't a diplomat, a rebellion, or even a military campaign. It was one man with a rifle and a grudge. A sniper who had somehow turned their most sacred space into a crime scene and vanished into the galaxy like a ghost with an attitude problem. Inside the central spire of the Council Citadel, meetings no longer ended in calm consensus. They ended in shouting. Members who had once voted in lockstep were now accusing one another of deceit, sabotage, and conspiracy. The chair of the Security Committee accused the Technology Guild of tampering with voting systems. The ambassador from the ice colonies refused to attend any meetings without a personal force field and a food taster. Even the fungal delegate from Poxus 5, who hadn't spoken aloud in 3 centuries, suddenly developed the ability to scream. The assassination had done more than remove a speaker. It had infected the council with uncertainty. Every old protocol now felt brittle. Every past decision suspect. It didn't help that Vex Callahan was releasing information, piecemeal, encrypted, and broadcast through outlaw channels, exposing the cracks in their foundation. He wasn't just on the run. He was unraveling them from within. Vex had discovered the patch, a small line of code buried deep in the Council's central archive system. It was elegant, subtle, invisible to anyone not looking for it. The patch didn't control the votes directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it skewed the presentation of evidence. It altered case summaries, suppressed data, and reclassified warnings as threats. It turned minor incidents into patterns of aggression. It twisted the picture just enough to tilt the scales. And over time, entire species, like Earth, were nudged toward extermination. He found it by accident, really. Breaking into a forgotten archival node on a moon called Niver, he was just looking for dirt, anything to explain why the Council moved so fast against Earth. What he found instead was a voting record that didn't match. Minutes that didn't align with decisions. And then the line of code itself. It had no signature. No origin. Just a date, 42 cycles ago. And the name of a planet no longer on any star map. That was when Vex stopped running and started digging. He started hitting targets not for sabotage, but for information. A council tax office here. A communications relay there. Every time he hit, he learned. He stitched together a map of silence, the ghost trail of planets and civilizations erased under the same pattern. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous he became. Not because he was armed, but because he was making sense. The council wasn't blind to it. They started tracing the leaks. Chasing him harder. They doubled the bounty. Then tripled it. They hired the Whisper Twins, interstellar bounty hunters who specialized in vanishing problems without noise or mess. They caught up with Vex on the edge of a black hole station, thinking they had him cornered. He bought them a drink, told them a joke about a counselor and a gravity well, then blew up the station and escaped on a garbage shuttle. Each move he made seemed to spread more chaos. Rumors bloomed like spores. Entire systems refused to comply with council mandates. Some sectors even offered to hide him. He was becoming something they feared more than an enemy. A symbol. The sniper who didn't listen. The man who said no to a decision no one had ever dared challenge. Back in the Citadel, a secret meeting was held between the remaining senior speakers. No aides. No guards. Just silence and fear. One of them, an elder with silicon veins and rust-colored eyes, finally spoke the question none of them wanted to admit. What if the patch was real? What if the votes had been compromised? What if Earth was not the first mistake? There was no answer. Because even the suggestion of a broken council was a threat to the entire structure. They had always governed by the illusion of perfection. Doubt was more dangerous than rebellion. And so they made a decision. Not to investigate, not to confirm, but to destroy the source of the infection. Vex Callahan had to be eliminated. Not as a prisoner. Not as a trial. Simply gone. Not for justice. For preservation. But not all of them agreed. One of the speakers, a young delegate named Murray Syn, began digging on her own. She had once voted to silence Earth without question. Now, she wasn't so sure. She traced the pattern Vex had left behind, following the data trails he hadn't had time to scrub. The evidence horrified her. She found the logs from the erased planets. Not just data. Messages. Warnings. Pleas. One message was from a species that had asked for help, not posed a threat. Another from a planet that had found evidence of the patch themselves, and were wiped weeks later. Murray realized something else. The same ship had visited every targeted planet just before the vote. A diplomatic vessel owned by the Bright Sun Corporation. A private firm that operated resource evaluations for the Council. Their influence was everywhere. Quiet. Clean. Financial. Political. And their founders sat on the ethics board. Vex was right. There was something buried in the Council. And it had roots deeper than any of them imagined. Meanwhile, Vex had gone dark. Not gone. Just quiet. Preparing. He wasn't planning another assassination. Not yet. He was planning something bigger. He had found 3 names. 3 individuals he believed were behind the patch, or at least protecting it. They were powerful. Connected. Untouchable. Which meant they were exactly the kind of people Vex liked to make bleed. The rifle, Mercy, was not enthusiastic. It warned him constantly. Not about death, Vex had made peace with that long ago, but about consequence. If he went after these targets, there would be no turning back. No forgiveness. No deals. This wasn't just a bullet in the dark. This was war with the most powerful institution in the galaxy. Vex didn't flinch. He just sat in the dark of an abandoned supply vessel, staring at the stars, chewing the last stick of gum he'd brought from Earth. Then he stood, loaded the rifle, and said, "Let's see how they like being hunted." They gave him 72 hours. Not to run, not to hide, not to beg for some last-minute galactic pardon. No, 72 hours to kill 3 of the most protected, influential, and deeply embedded individuals in the galaxy. The kind of targets that didn't appear on official records. People who officially didn't exist, yet unofficially controlled the tides of silence across entire star systems. 3 ghosts behind curtains of power, and Earth's last hope of survival rested on a man who once tried to shoot a vending machine for not accepting his coin. Vex Callahan didn't laugh when they gave him the ultimatum. He just muttered, "Fair enough," spat into a ventilation shaft, and got to work. The first target was on Dren 4, a city planet drowning in light and noise, designed to overwhelm the senses and hide anything resembling truth. The target was a council-linked financier named Orovelk, a man whose influence was so well hidden that he only existed in the financial sublayers of intergalactic trade law. No one knew what he looked like. No one knew where he lived. But money leaves fingerprints. And Vex, for all his recklessness, understood systems better than he let on. He followed the money through shell companies, encrypted transactions, and AI-managed loopholes until it pointed to a single high-rise shaped like a crystalline dagger slicing the clouds. Orovelk had a penthouse at the very top, protected by 5 separate security firms and an environmental lockdown system that could seal him in at the press of a button. So Vex didn't aim for the penthouse. He aimed for the building next to it. He positioned himself in a decrepit maintenance shed atop a weather control tower, chewing on expired protein bars and waiting for the right alignment. When it came, he used a magnetic sling system to launch a single bullet, a self-guided, micro-boosted projectile that adjusted its trajectory mid-air. The bullet bounced once, grazed the side of a weather drone, and curved into Orovelk's penthouse window like it had changed its mind mid-flight. Oro died while sipping imported ice wine, his last words apparently being a complaint about the wine's temperature. Vex watched the distant explosion of glass through his scope, nodded once, and said, "One down." The second target was a trickier beast, literally. A shape-shifting life form known as Cothrix, employed as a communications strategist for the Council. No one had ever seen its true form. It could become anyone, vanish into any crowd, and held the keys to every message entering or leaving Council space. Vex tracked Cothrix to a diplomatic masquerade on the orbital pleasure station known as Varys Prime, a place where masks weren't just fashion, they were mandatory. Everyone was someone else, all the time. For most people, that was a game. For Cothrix, it was camouflage. Vex infiltrated the gala with a stolen invite and a poorly tailored tuxedo that made him look like a retired magician. Mercy, his rifle, was compacted into a disguised saxophone case. The plan was simple: wait for the creature to drop its disguise and reveal itself to its handlers. What actually happened was far dumber. Cothrix, sensing danger, tried to impersonate Vex himself. It was a fatal error. The real Vex spotted the imposter on the central dance floor, doing an exaggerated version of his own limp and drinking something bright green while pretending to flirt with an ambassador from the Gas Cloud Federation. Vex walked up to it, said, "You've got my bad side wrong," and shot it through the heart with a silenced dart round. The creature's form shimmered violently before collapsing into a pile of twitching tentacles. Chaos erupted around him. Vex didn't run. He just took another drink from the tray of a horrified server and strolled out during the confusion, humming along with the lounge music. "Two down," he said to himself, already scanning the station for a fast exit. The third target was the most dangerous, not because of security, but because it was personal. Her name was Savarin. Once a military tactician. Now, the silent operator behind the Silence Protocol's enforcement fleet. Unlike the others, she knew who Vex was. They had served together once, long ago. Before the Council, before the dishonorable discharge, before Vex had become more myth than man. Sava was smart. Cold. Calculating. She would expect him. She would plan for him. And she would not hesitate to kill him. Vex found her on a Council vessel stationed in the atmosphere of a dying star. The ship was a fortress, suspended in radiation clouds and protected by gravitational mines. He couldn't sneak aboard. He couldn't snipe from a distance. So he did the only thing she wouldn't expect. He sent her a message. He simply wrote, "We need to talk." To his surprise, she replied. Their meeting happened on neutral ground, a decommissioned war moon where ancient weapons still hung in rusted racks and the ghosts of past battles lingered in the silence. Salva arrived alone, armored, her face unreadable. Vex came with Mercy slung over his shoulder and a bag of Earth coffee beans as a peace offering. They talked. For 2 hours. About the old days. About the Council. About the patch. And finally, about the line between duty and delusion. "You're wrong, you know," Salva said, sipping coffee like it was foreign acid. "They're not silencing the galaxy out of fear. They're doing it because it works." Vex stared at her. "I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to make them bleed when they lie." She smiled. "Then take the shot." He did. Salva didn't flinch as the round tore through her chest. She fell back with a sigh, almost relieved. Vex caught her before she hit the ground, holding her like something sacred had broken inside him. He didn't say anything. Neither did Mercy. For once, even the rifle was silent. 3 targets. 3 deaths. 1 man. He left the war moon in a stolen scout pod, exhausted and bleeding from a cut he didn't remember getting. The countdown was over. He had done the impossible. The message would reach the Council soon. Earth would be spared. For now. But the silence had already changed. He hadn't just shaken the foundation. He had cracked it wide open. Systems were failing. Votes were being questioned. Truth, once hidden behind polished words and flawless archives, now poured into the streets like a flood. And somewhere deep in the stars, Vex knew the final shot was still out there, waiting for someone to pull the trigger. Maybe it wouldn't be him. Maybe it never had to be. But someone had to start it. And he already had. There was no parade. No dramatic broadcast declaring Earth's survival. No official statement from the Council admitting fault or confessing corruption. What came instead was a strange, echoing quiet across the galactic network. Orders stopped. Patrol routes vanished. The Silence Protocol went offline without a single word. Somewhere, hidden deep in the encrypted core of the Council's systems, an override command had been executed. Entire fleets powered down, and the deletion orders that once threatened to wipe Earth from existence were buried, mislabeled, or lost. Just like that, the threat was gone. Not because the Council had forgiven Earth, but because they could no longer pretend everything was fine. Vex Callahan had taken the one thing they depended on more than anything else, control, and scattered it like ashes on a wind they couldn't catch. But he didn't see any of it. By the time the galaxy began to settle into this new, unstable silence, Vex had already been taken. Not killed. Not imprisoned in any official sense. Just gone. The last visual feed from a security drone showed him limping across the dark corridor of a forgotten orbital station, clutching Mercy in one hand and a bleeding wound in the other. Then the feed cut out. When teams arrived, all they found was a smear of blood, a broken datapad, and a spent bullet casing with a quote etched into the side. "Truth doesn't need permission." After that, nothing. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he was dead, finally caught in one of the traps meant for him. Others claimed he had faked his own death and disappeared into a lawless sector where bounty hunters became warlords and legends lived in shadows. A few insisted he had ascended into something else entirely, a kind of mythic vigilante, the first man to ever outsniper a galaxy full of silence. But Earth knew the truth, or at least the part that mattered. Vex had done what no one else could. He'd cracked open a lie wrapped in ceremony, and bought them time with nothing but grit and a trigger. On Earth, the reaction was mixed. Relief, first and foremost. Celebrations in underground bunkers, toasts raised in orbital stations, illegal fireworks bursting through city domes despite martial law still being in effect. But behind the joy was something more complicated. Guilt. Grief. Gratitude with nowhere to land. Vex had never been a hero. Never even tried. He was the man you didn't invite to the party because he'd probably burn it down before the cake came out. And yet, he'd save them all, not by cleaning up their mess, but by dragging the galaxy through it until it couldn't ignore the stench. Back at the Galactic Council, silence became an infection. Debates grew longer. Trust thinned. Investigations bloomed in private. A few members resigned. Some vanished. Others started speaking in terms that had never been heard in those chambers before: reform, audit, transparency. Mireille Swinen, the young delegate who had helped leak the final files, became a quiet force in the shadows. She didn't take credit. She didn't want it. What she wanted was for the next Vex Callahan never to be needed again. And for that she worked. As for the rifle, Mercy, it was eventually found. Abandoned in a junk dealer's cargo bay on a minor trade moon. The AI inside had been wiped. All memory logs corrupted. When asked what happened, the junk dealer shrugged and said some drifter traded it for a bottle of Martian whiskey and directions to the desert. And far away, in that same desert on a forgotten moon whose name didn't matter, a man with gray-streaked hair and a limp walked barefoot across the sand. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't wear a badge. He didn't speak unless someone asked him something worth answering. He built the shack out of scrap and silence, and he watched the stars like he was waiting for one to fall just wrong enough to require his attention. No one knew his name there. He never told it. But once, a child wandered out too far and nearly fell into a crevice. The man caught her, dusted her off, and carried her home without a word. Her mother offered him food, asked where he came from, who he used to be. He only smiled and said, "Someone who didn't listen when I was supposed to." Back in the inner systems, stories grew. They weren't always accurate. Some had him single-handedly destroying fleets with a look. Others claimed he was half machine, part demon, or an agent of the universe's own will. One particularly popular holodrama portrayed him as a misunderstood lover-turned-rebel, armed with twin plasma blades and a tragic past involving a sentient dolphin. Vex would have hated it. But he would have laughed. There was no epilogue for him. No monument. Just that quiet shift in the stars, the small pause between commands, and the new way people asked questions where they used to obey. Students in the Academy for Intergalactic Diplomacy now studied the Silence Protocol not as a tool, but a warning. Young officers asked about consent, context, and consequence. And on Earth, every year, on the day the Council's order was supposed to go into effect, people left a single bullet on rooftops. No note. No flag. Just a bullet. In one of the oldest schools still standing in the Northern Hemisphere, a teacher read a story aloud to a class of children too young to understand the war Earth had barely survived. It was a simple tale, heavily sanitized, about a sniper who didn't follow orders, and who asked a dangerous question: what if the silence wasn't about peace, but power? The students listened with wide eyes. When the story ended, one child raised their hand and asked, "Did he come back?" The teacher hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe not the way people expected. But he's out there. Somewhere." The child nodded thoughtfully and looked out the window, where a shooting star just crossed the sky. No one heard Vex Callahan's voice again. No broadcasts. No messages. Just echoes. In quiet revolts. In systems that refused orders. In places where silence used to reign and now met resistance. The galaxy hadn't been saved. It had been shaken. And sometimes that was enough. Because truth, like a well-placed bullet, doesn't need applause. It just needs to land.